I grew up in Portland, Oregon. I wanted to be a wrestling coach, football coach, and science teacher. In August of '67, the biggest draft call of Vietnam happened. My student deferment wasn't any good, so I joined the Army. Somebody had your file, and they read through your file, and the guy says, well, you got 2 years of biology as a science major, and you've got a comparative anatomy and a kinesiology, and he says, you're built in as a medic. And I says, well, how long is the medic school? He says, well, it's about 50 weeks, 52 weeks. And I'm thinking, well, that'll keep me out of Vietnam for another year, right? Okay, sign me up. There was only one place they needed trained medics, because they were always getting shot up, right? So I knew I was trained well, and I knew I could do a job, and I knew I could save lives. So why put off the inevitable is basically. We landed in Benoit. We got out of the airplane. It was like 110 degrees. And the humidity was like 90%, right? I mean, it's like walking into a sauna. First 6 months, I was in Bravo, 1st of the 7th, 1st Cav Division. We were out of Quan Loy, which was a small fire base. It was for small fixed wings and helicopters. And from there, we would take choppers and go out to the Cambodian border and do these search and destroy missions for certain areas. Because of my advanced training, they put me in as a head company medic, which meant I was with the CP, or the command position, and I had 4 other medics, 1 platoon medic for each platoon, and I was in charge of those 4 other guys, making sure they had the supplies they needed and double check that they were doing their job, et cetera, et cetera. I was only in the field for a couple of weeks, and we were on what they call a search and destroy. We were on the Cambodian border. We were looking for bunker complexes. Point man got hit. And of course, anytime the first shot, everybody lays down and returns fire. And if nothing comes back, then you're good. If you're still getting return fire, then the firefight's on. The lead man was on the ground, or the point man. And so there was an old mahogany stump that was about 3 foot tall. And so I grabbed him and rolled him over the top of me and behind the stump so I could get up, so I had a little bit of cover to work on him. And he wasn't breathing, and I didn't see any serious blood, but he wasn't breathing, so I started CPR. But every time I did my chest compressions, I kept hearing the sound. Well, you got to realize this is the first time I'd ever had that amount of adrenaline pumping at one time, when you got live rounds going by you. And I opened his shirt, and he'd taken one right through the heart. So basically he was DOA. Kind of pissed me off, and I ended up picking up the M16, and the individual who probably shot him, I don't know that for a fact because I wasn't up there, but he had an AK-47, and he was shooting to his left and hiding behind this pole in a kitchen area, which was in plain sight of me because he was behind the pole. And I eliminated the enemy, let's just put it that way. I went into the kitchen area where the individual who I'd been shooting at was laying dead on the ground. But evidently, just before the firefight, he had just fixed himself a lunch, which was a bowl of rice. This being the bowl. So I sat down and literally ate his lunch after I killed him. That was my job, was to save lives, But sometimes you have to take a life to save the life that you're working on. Otherwise, he's going to die and I'm going to die. If I die, it ain't going to help the person that needs my help. So you got to do what you got to do. After my first firefight, I never allowed myself to get really close to anybody. If you get close to somebody, 2 days later, they could be killed. And then you'd have to go through all that remorse. I was more professional. This is what we got to do. This is what we got to do. You make sure of this, make sure of that. And I kind of stayed to myself. I think for more of self-protection. So the colonel of the 15th Medavac unit came up at one of the award ceremonies and said, "Hey, you've been in the field for 6 months. You know, you can transfer out and volunteer for Medavac. I'll guarantee you 3 hots on a cot." Well, when you're living in the jungle, in the mud and the blood and the beer and whatever else, and the rainy season coming on, I said, "Hey, that sounds pretty good. Sleeping with a roof on my head and getting 3 hots." But he neglected to tell the whole story, which was every time he went in to pick up wounded, somebody had wounded those Americans. And that means there was automatic weapons fire and they had these big red and white crosses on it made a hell of a target on those H model Hueys, right? We were actually picking up the wounded after they had already been treated, in most cases, by someone who were doing my job on the field. So they were doing the initial EMS, and I was transporting them from point A to what was now known as the MASH unit, right? Forward aid station. You could take 3 litters, stack 3 litters. You could have 2 ambulatory. You'd get a sit rep from the ground unit. So you say, okay, I want this stretcher first, this stretcher second, this stretcher third. Then we'll take ambulatory, 1 on the one side and 1 on the other, say if we had a full load. But you had to have a loading sequence so that when you landed, it would all flow smoothly, fast, so we could get the hell out of Dodge. Because obviously, you've got automatic weapons being shot at you or around you all the time, so you didn't want to loiter. I mean, it's not like you want to play a game of cards while you're waiting, you know. I'd be setting IVs. I'd be doing a sit rep on each one. 90% of everybody we took in that was living stayed living. They developed what they call the golden hour, which is still being used now. So if you could get an injured person from the field to a evac hospital or medical facility within an hour, they had a 90% chance of surviving, no matter what their injuries were. So consequently, that was all this EMS stuff that we have today in civilian life, these lifeline, these medevac choppers, all of those type of things started in Vietnam. The August 12th of 1969, the Vietnamese made a big push on several fire bases. And our happened to be one of the fire bases. Midnight, they started dropping in direct fire, and they'd hit a couple, 3 bunkers direct hits. And so I moved down the line and started treating the wounded, and because there was nobody else on the bunker, I started using return fire so that they knew somebody was in that bunker, that it wasn't just available to be overrun. You see what I'm saying? It lasted about 6 hours. And I went back for a resupply, brought more people in to do the bunkers, and it was interesting for about 6 hours. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I went back to my rack, or my bunk, whatever your bed, whatever you want to call it, and I was like, because I hadn't had any sleep that night, right? And the first sergeant comes in and racks me out of the bunk. Come on, your colonel wants to see you up at the mess hall. They call everybody to attention. They call their names and put us all out front. And I don't even know what's going on, right? I left Vietnam in April 17th of 1970. Life is nothing more than going from one transformation of life to another, right? My transition, or those of us who served in Vietnam or in the military at that time, went through a little more severe than others of our era. You are what your life's experiences make you. It changed my entire life. I joined the VFW in 1984. I've been doing things with them for about 38 years. Started out as commander of Post 4108 here in Redmond. State of Oregon, I was a commander in 2000, 2001. Western Conference elected me as Surgeon General in 2009-10. And then again in just last year, 2021-22. Serving as a medic in Vietnam, it took me probably 20 years, 30 years to kind of get my own stuff together. But then I realized that I needed to keep serving veterans. So the VFW was established 120 plus years ago. Veterans helping veterans, that's our motto. All I've ever done, no matter what I was elected to, was to help my community that I lived in, the veterans in that community, the youth in that community. When you're young, you don't really have a trail to follow, but it develops as you go through life, and pretty soon you go, okay, this is the path that I'm supposed to be on. So, if you're that type of person that takes a job on, you're going to do the best job you can. And yes, you're going to make mistakes, but you learn from those mistakes and you keep on trucking and you keep moving forward, and you do the best you can. And hopefully it's good enough at the end of the day.